Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I have the pleasure of having Alex Ellis join me so that we can do a walkthrough of the OpenFaaS repositories by analyzing the commits with a tool that I've been working on called Git Series, in which we load all of the commits and the deltas within the commits into InfluxDB to see what we can learn. First, hello, Alex. How are you?
Hello, David. Good to see you. I think I've heard you talking about the Git series program a few times, and I was sort of interested when you reached out to find out a bit more about what your tool is doing and how you put it together. And maybe I can give a bit of flavor to what you're seeing and a bit more context. So yeah, I'm interested to see what we can get to.
Yeah, so this was conference-driven development. I submitted a talk called "Get Lost in Time Series" to try and showcase new and novel use cases for time series that goes beyond the basics, like Linux system monitoring. Like we've all done it, we all know how to do that, but I wanted to try and find something different. And the talk got accepted, and I went, "Oh shit, I need to write this tool now." And that's what we'll show. So let's get up to speed. I will share my screen. Can you see my dashboard?
Yeah, I can see it.
Awesome. All right. So this is a tool that is hosted on GitLab and written in Go. The funny story is there is another version written in Rust. So we have gitlab.com/rawcode/git series, which is the Rust version. I had a few challenges with that, other than my own inability to write good Rust code, which is getting better all the time. But the libgit library for Rust was single-threaded, no concurrency, and didn't support async await. So processing slightly larger repositories proved to be quite cumbersome. So I fell back to my more familiar tooling, which was Go, and rewrote the tool here. You're more than welcome to compile this, run it yourself on your own repositories, and have some fun.
Just noticed you don't have a README in this version, but in the Rust one, it seemed like you ran the tool and then you pipe it to influx write.
That
So
is
you're
correct.
effectively doing generating insert statements.
Very similar. So yeah, you point this at a repository, you give it the analyze command, and it spits out raw line protocol, which is like it's just the raw format that InfluxDB understands for write endpoints without doing any conversion. You can
Okay.
then just pipe that to influx write, or there is an
That
example
what does that look
repository.
like? There's a line. Yeah.
Here's some I prepared earlier. Oh no, it's not there. I'll share my whole screen this time, which
Okay.
never goes wrong, right? So this is my cloud VM where I processed all of the OpenFaaS line protocol. Now, if I just pick one that's small,
I don't
the
know what
docs.
would be small. The cloud functions one would be pretty small.
All right, let's go for the cloud functions. Then, oh, it's, yeah, I think that's about as big as I can get it without it going too illegible. But this is a line of line protocol. It essentially starts with a metric or measurement name. So this is actually analyzing one of the lines. This is one of the deltas within the Git history. It then applies a bunch of tags, which allow us to slice and dice this data at query time. So you can see here, we have a fair amount of tags. So when we analyze a line from the ref log, we add a host, an owner, and a repository, which allows us to identify where the change came from.
Right.
We
So
add
if
a,
it was on GitLab, for instance, it would be a different host. Yeah.
exactly. So this is GitHub, OpenFaaS, cloudfunctions.git. We have a status annotation, a tag on line changes, which tells whether the line was added or deleted, the directory in which the change occurred, the file name, the extension is then broken down just because we want to be able to query that on its own. We have the author name, the author email, and whether I was able to detect a comment marker is really crude code if you look at it. I'm basically looking for a hash symbol or a double slash or a slash star, I think. So it's not sophisticated, but it will hopefully give us a little bit of insight into when documentation was added to the project, or whether the project started with documentation. Good for identifying, hackathons generally produce a lot of documentation for projects. You
I
can
can
actually
see
pinpoint.
contents there. That must be quite a burden on the database to import all the contents of every delta. Like we've got the exact text change, right, on each line.
Well, yeah. So the reason I add the contents is really because I like to filter projects' commits for swear words and then see how much they swear. But this space here means that it's no longer a tag, and this is stored as a field. So it's not indexed. So searching is much slower.
Yeah, you couldn't index that really. But what you could do is something I did at university, actually, is I wrote a tool that would basically do a bit of something called like TDIF. I can't remember the exact terminology now, but you could find the density of terms relative to the catalog. You could add the most interesting ones. I don't know, can you do a kind of array, or does it just have to be comment value?
Yeah, InfluxDB fields only store string or integer or numeric types. So
Okay.
no arrays.
And have you got the commit message here?
Yes. So because this is the line, we won't see it there. But if we grep on commit,
actually, just above there's a word that says commit.
Yeah. So because this is a VM, I can't seem to clear anything, or at least maybe this is just a Google Cloud thing. But let's just try and highlight this. So we do have a commit here. So the tags are very similar. We have the author, where it came from. The fields are slightly different. We now have how many files were modified in this commit. Yeah. We have the total sum of insertions and deletions. We do store the SHA as well, so that we can then do something with that commit if we choose to. And we have the commit message here.
That's great. So you've got lines, and that's one series. You've got commit, that's another series. Have you got anything else that you do?
Yes, but why don't we browse that from here? So let's leave the dashboard for the time being. We'll come to the Data Explorer, which is going to be a bit nicer than just looking at the line protocol itself. When did the OpenFaaS, when was first commit?
You could put 2016.
2016.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the measurements that we have. So we've seen line, we've seen commit. We also have tags so that we can track the releases that were tagged within the repository. Yeah. And we do some interesting stuff with the file itself. So we track when a file was added and removed from the repository, breaking that down by extension to try and identify what kind of code has come and gone with the repository. What I found really interesting when I was processing the InfluxDB repo itself is you can actually visualize that transition from JavaScript to TypeScript, because the JavaScript code has this big line going up, and then TypeScript comes up, and JavaScript falls off a cliff. So
interesting. So I'm seeing the sort of outer part of this, the database, to call it, the Git series, and then I'm seeing a number of measurements, but I don't see the extension as a field for that measurement in your view now.
Yes, because that is a tag. So if we filter,
you're looking at a specific field. Okay, so we can browse them there.
So
I haven't
have
used
access
the UI for a long time. It seems to have changed, had a redesign.
Yes, so today we are running the 2.0 beta release. It's new, shiny, allows us to play with the new query language, which is functional. So if I show you that, let's say, let's just look at the last 30 days of files and hit submit. We can view the raw data. And we can see that we have the author, the directory this file exists in. As we spoke about just before we went live, we're going to see a lot of this vendor directory.
And we can exclude on that as well, right? Because we know where it is.
We can exclude, yeah, because this is a tag. So we can try and use the regex filter to say, don't show me anything within the vendor. And whether the file was modified or whether it was new.
You have PromQL as well, don't you? So I remember there was a big sort of controversy about Influx and Prometheus, and then Influx went and implemented the PromQL language. Is that still available?
So there's a transpiler, which is in its early days. It's not something that is in 2.x at this point in time.
Okay.
But the PromQL transpiler, The plan being you can use PromQL to transpile to Flux, which is the language that we see here.
Right. Okay, that's interesting.
And Julius from the Prometheus team has been working on that for Influx. So
Yeah.
it's quite exciting. I haven't followed the status of it in the last month or so, but hopefully it's still coming along pretty well.
Okay. Now, this isn't the SQL that I'm used to seeing. Or the
No, InfluxQL was the query language from InfluxDB1. Because we're using InfluxDB2, we're using the new shiny functional Flux language.
Can I go back and use what I know, or do I just have to figure this out?
You will be able to soon. So there is a current work in progress right now within Influx Data to provide InfluxQL compatibility mode for people that want to continue using that SQL-like language.
Cool.
Okay, so we kind of discussed Git series as a tool. I've shown you the output. I used Telegraph to import that to InfluxDB. The example is on Git series-example, where you can see the Telegraph configuration and a Docker Compose file for spinning up InfluxDB2. The only other thing that I had done before we started streaming today was apply this packager.yaml. So InfluxDB2 also supports a manifest format, very similar to Kubernetes. This allows us to create the buckets, create variables, and create dashboards. Everything that we're going to look at today was applied from this massive 1,800 lines of YAML. So what that gave us was...
How do you find writing those files? I mean, is that something that I can generate once I've keyed it in the UI, or do I need to write it there and then keep applying it until the UI looks as I want it?
Yes, you can definitely use the UI, and then you can export any of the dashboards individually from here. Or using the CLI tool, you can export everything from your instance, and it will give you the YAML file there.
And what did you do for yours? Because it's quite long, isn't it? There's quite a few bits and pieces in there.
Yes, I build in the UI and I export to YAML, although I am rather active right now on InfluxDB JSONet.
Yeah, that will make things a bit more programmatic.
So I've been working on this for a good couple of months now. It's got decent support. There are a few things that I still need to improve in it to support more of the types. I took a step back a little bit just because the InfluxDB2 packager component was just starting to approach being generally available. So now that that is, my plan is to go back and complete those bindings for JSONet. I don't know which one it is prepared.
Nice.
All right, so let's take a look at the first dashboard then. So we have 4 available to us today. There's the overview, which is going to allow us to take a high-level look at all of the OpenFaaS repositories that I imported. We'll then kind of do a deep dive into 1 or 2 of the more interesting ones, using your judgment there. The last 2 dashboards are very much a work in progress. I'm curious to see what we get out of them. But this one here, the year-on-year, tries to show you just like a side-by-side comparison of each year that the project has been active. And the wall of shame, which is really poorly named, and I apologize, but it tries to just do something a bit more fun with the data. So for open source, I don't think it's going to be that useful, but if you run this on a private repository within an organization, it'll give you interesting stats like who needs time off, who's been committing more than 4 days a week for 3 months or something like that. So cool. It tries to build like leaderboards and
it'd be good to see that.
All right, so we'll start with the overview. Let me move this out of the way. Cool. So you said 2016. Let's just push this back a little bit and try and find that first commit.
First commit should be right at the end.
It is. So
first December that year.
Yep, we got 19 commits before the 1st of January 2017. So this was a Christmas hobby project then that spiraled out of control.
No, it started before that actually. It was called Dispatch, Funker Dispatch, and it was a Node.js application I'd written, publicized. It got really popular, but then I decided to rewrite it in Go and submit it as a Docker Funkel hack. And so I think about November, I had the code on my computer. I pushed it up in December, then just carried on, as you can see, quite regularly from then.
Oh, nice. So are we going to see that JavaScript node transition, or is this
No, because that
repository
was in a
fresh?
different place. That was write one, throw it away. We can find that repo later, but it's not in the OpenFaaS org.
Okay, no problem.
What will we see? I guess at some point when if we delete the vendor folder in the Go code, we'll see the code base get a lot smaller at some point, but not just yet.
Yeah, I think we've definitely we'll try and filter that out when we get down to the weeds of things for sure. Now, the first thing that's jumping out to me are these peaks at Christmas each year. Do you tend to do a lot of coding over the?
You have to do it a bit slower so that I can see. I can't read it when you move the mouse that fast.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
that's October. That's not.
So we got. It's just before the Christmas break, and here we have November. So October, November seems to be where you find your stride.
Well, it's probably related to things that were going on there, and as we say with the vendoring, that could just be that someone added a dependency that had a lot of code in it. It might not necessarily be what it looks like. So perhaps there was something that we added in the Kubernetes client.
So this is just the number of commits we're looking at just now. So is there kind of...
Okay, so they're commits rather than the lines. In which case, yeah, then the vendor folder wouldn't come into that.
No, so this is a pull everything out of Git series over a dashboard time range. We're going to filter the measurements on the commits. We're pulling in the message just because we need some field to count. We flatten the table structure, which we can talk about if we want to get into how Flux works, but we flatten it and then we do an aggregation over a window. So we're breaking down the commits into monthly chunks and we do a count of those commits within that window.
I mean, I suppose the first thing that you see there is that at some point, before the first peak, when was that? Sorry, the first big peak. Yeah. I go back to the beginning of the curve at the bottom. What are we at? That's interesting. We're after the first DockerCon where I presented this in Austin, Texas, and we've already moved over to having a Kubernetes provider. We go back a bit further till we get to about April. I think it was April, May was when that presentation was. And it was just after that I decided we needed Kubernetes support in OpenFaaS. So you can see how early on it was in the lifespan it was put in. And then the FaaS CLI came about after that, which is potentially why we've got that. That's like the third blob. The community started contributing more then as well. Have we got a breakdown of total contributors?
We do, two cells down from here, so we'll get to there in just a minute.
Well, can you bring it up perhaps and show it next to it? And what we might see is you correlate it, but they coincide. I mean, that doesn't look right either because there's hundreds of contributors, and if this is the whole history, that doesn't look right.
So there's 372 contributors across the entire time, but our graph...
Do I have 284 on our metrics?
All right, let's refresh this dashboard. Jump back down.
Bit of a discrepancy there.
Well, let's see what this query is doing. So we pull out all of the commits. Now it depends on the merge process for these projects, because if you use merge commits, I may have to remove filtering out
basis, but remove it anyway, see what happens.
Yeah, so we do a unique on the author email. So let's submit this.
Still doesn't. Still looks very low. Because is it a commit you're looking for? I mean, we do rebases on it.
Okay, let's debug, right? I'm going to copy this.
And the author email, as I saw in your previous query, was mine for all of them. So I think what you might need is a committer email, or you might need another field there, which might be where it's going wrong. What other columns have you got?
Let's go back to our data explorer and try and work this out.
I saw Lucas last commits into FASD. if you look at the last 30 days, maybe there was some data there.
Pull this all out. We'll just look at commits, and I want to group by. Oh, I've angered it. There we go. Let's just write it in flux. We want to group by column author email.
Yeah, that's the problem, is that you're effectively using the wrong field. I think you need to use author name because when it's rebased, it's not.
Oh, we got an error. What's going on here? So these are all of the commit objects. We have author name and email there.
Scroll down in author name. I'm pretty sure I saw Lucas in there recently. Yeah. Ken, Radoslav. The email isn't changing. So what you need to do is, because of the way it's rebased, and I had this when I was working with the Git API, because Derek, our bot, can generate very detailed release notes, and there's specific fields you need to pull out to get back to the original email. So if you were able to use author name instead, I don't know why your group command isn't working. Should be better.
Well, I think that's we've got a schema collision. So I think one of the author names is a float value.
Interesting. What about put a where in there? Could you put a where it's a string? Is one of them a null, maybe?
I'm not sure how to handle this just now. Let's come back in here and see if we can modify it on our graph. So configure, and I'm just going to change this. All right, that may be better then.
Looks better. Looks closer. Okay, now you see that big peak there. I think if you're somehow able to pull that graph up to underneath the commits, we might see them correlate.
Sorry, what were you suggesting there?
Pull up the contributors graph up, drop it underneath the commits once we can see them together. So imagine you can do that. So just, yeah, if you plonk it.
Oh, did I not drag it? Let's try again. All right, come with me. There we go. And over here. Yep.
So that, I think that's kind of indicative of what happened in the project as well as those peaks, which is that more people, more commits. After the DockerCon event, we went and added the Kubernetes support more or less on my own, but then we created a CLI. And there might be a way that you can add to this graph what repo it is. So we can project it by how many contributions and what repo they were a member of. I don't know if you can do that.
So we do break it down here. So let's first get rid of this clone, and then we will update the queries so that they're all using the author name so that we don't have any weirdness.
And then you've got a reference to author email above that to remove. I don't know if you want to remove that.
We'll keep the GitHub stuff in unless we notice a problem. So what we can see here is the contributions were in FaaS CLI and FaaS.
Well, FaaS CLI came about at that point because at DockerCon, when it showed this off, there wasn't a CLI. So it was bash files that built the OpenFaaS containers. Now we've got FaaS CLI build and FaaS CLI up.
And then we have FaaSnetes, the first commit, really early. So what's that, August 2017?
Yeah, okay. So it was late. It was open sourced or put online later than I thought. I thought it was just after that DockerCon. Obviously, it was a little bit later. And then that one, it's quite interesting to see that one spikes as it's being developed. I
Yeah,
think
definitely.
we had a lot of traction around blog posts and events that people were going out and doing. That's why we've got more people contributing to the FaaS repo, that number going up.
Yeah, and what's the FaaS provider that kicked off around the same time?
Yeah, so that was to support the work for FaaSneties, so that it was effectively hard coded to Swarm. At that point, it introduced a REST API, HTTP REST API, and FaaS provider became like a standard, and then FaaSneties implemented it, and that later FaaS Swarm got broken out of FaaS, and then it implements that as well.
Ah. And do you know off the top of your head, before I hover, but what's this big orange peak?
Where are you?
Just at the end of 2018, the orange peak.
Your mouse isn't where you think it is.
Well, if I hover over it, it'll tell you what the repo is. I was trying not to.
Okay, you mean that massive one there? That is probably the workshop. If it's not the workshop, it might be OpenFaaS Cloud.
It was OpenFaaS Cloud, yeah. So that kicked off when?
We can find out when the workshop was created on here as well. And I think it was somewhere in 2018 because I did it with my team at VMware.
I didn't import the workshop.
You didn't?
No, sorry.
But do you see FaaS Swarm is in there? And if you can single one out, I don't know if you can filter one out. You look at FaaS Swarm, you see basically almost never changes in history. And that's because the API has been super stable.
Yep,
even when it was being actively hacked on by the Docker team, it was not a pain to work with compared to Kubernetes Go client.
So we can filter out here, but we could also do the deeper dive on the next dashboard too. So FaaS Swarm, like that?
Yeah.
No. I'm not sure I've got this right. Is that FaaSneties? FaaSD?
Yeah, you've got something wrong in your query.
I definitely have something wrong with my query. Let's just drop this back out, submit, and then we'll use this wonderful raw data. And we can see, it's .get on the end. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So FaaSSwarm.get. That's better.
Nice.
Yeah, there's FaaSSwarm.
And even though there's a peak there, I guess we're not really looking at the commits now. We're looking at the amount of contributors, but it's pretty flat.
Yeah, I mean, Kubernetes just took over, didn't it? Especially over the last kind of 18 months. I'm curious about these little...
They're just sort of tweaks, maybe for the documentation, maybe updating the Golang version. It's not been deprecated yet.
Cool.
What is the wavy one in the background? That's the FaaS, isn't it?
The pink wavy?
Yeah.
Yep, that's FaaS.
Where's FaaSD come in? Can we find that? It'd be in the last it'd be in 2019, I think.
Let's just
caught the color of it there.
So there is a change in the master branch of InfluxDB that allows you to change how these tooltips work. So you can filter on an individual series, but it's not on the Docker image yet. I added that feature because I got really frustrated with the Git series analysis stuff. Because there's a lot of series and I want to be able to pick how I interact with it. So you want to take a look at FaaSD, right? There we go. Oh.
First, well,
just share them.
Oh, actually, the thing about this is that it's more complicated than that because it was in my account and it was called FaaS Containerd. So again, this is why context is everything really. Is it started a lot earlier as FaaS Containerd, and then at some point I created FaaSD and then decided they both needed to live together, and that isn't reflected.
Oh, that's why
it wasn't a renamed repo. It was.
You can share all this context now, which is great.
Yeah. Really, we got some releases then underneath that. I like that colorful graph. It's very pretty.
Yeah. We also have light mode if you prefer that. I don't know if that's maybe a bit bright.
bit harsh, yeah.
Depending on my mood, I switch between them.
Right.
Okay, so we do have release information. The first cell that we have here is just kind of a look at the cadence of all the projects. I don't know if there's actually any use in this one yet. I haven't found one. But when we break that down by repository, I think it gets a little bit more interesting.
I also think, like, when is the first release? When did you start doing release hygiene? And having had a project running effectively for 2 months, maybe about just over 2 months before the first release tag there. And then does that mean there was 3 at that point?
Yes, so that means in January 2017, you had 3 releases.
That's not January, that's February, isn't it?
Well, this window is at the start of February, which means the releases happened a month earlier.
Oh, okay.
So if we break this down, like we're looking at monthly, but if we break that down to weekly, you'll actually see the weeks.
Okay, where it actually was.
Yeah, so we've got one in the 5th of January. So the first week of January 2017. Another
yeah, so it was very soon after the repo was that.
Yeah. If you want, we can view it daily. But probably not as useful.
I mean, one of the things that the source D team found when they were looking at it, and they didn't have any context, was like, why are you releasing multiple times per day? And basically, it's because the releases that generate the artifacts. And if you merge a PR, you want to have that available for people to test or to update a compose file or to just do an update and drag it in. It's very cumbersome to sort of get someone to run through developer instructions just to do a build to get an artifact to run it. And so if it looks stable, if you're happy with it, you cut a release. Then maybe something else came in that you weren't expecting that's also, well, we might as well have that as well. And then you get a new artifact for each one. It's pretty much free storage on GitHub and Docker Hub.
Yeah. I think something that's standing out to me from this graph here is that you mentioned that the some sort of migration or moving of FASD, but what we actually see is there's 23 releases initially, and I'm going to assume those happened. Those tags were migrated from the other repo, maybe.
I don't think they were. I don't know why there's 23 tags. I don't know what that is.
Let's see if we can.
You could look on GitHub and find out.
I mean, they all happen very quickly.
Like how quickly?
Okay, let's go down to our daily, and then let's just zoom into this window. So 7 on the first day, 24th of December 2019. 4 on the 25th.
It seems a bit high to me. I'm not sure what that is, unless it's...
Okay, so we're going to look at the deep dive dashboard, and this will actually list the individual releases as a table. So let's just take a look at the FASD repo there.
There is actually 47 releases of this, and I'm now struggling to think why there'd be so many. I wonder if this was when we've got some odd untagged release there. I'm not sure what that is.
Well, my scatter plot is broken.
I do wonder if I was sort of fighting Travis for a little bit. I don't know. No, they do seem to have assets on from quite early on. Don't know why. We've had too much Christmas pudding.
So this is a scatter plot visualization of the exact same above. I use scatter plots as a way to kind of identify outliers. We can see FAS CLI had quite a heavy release. I don't know what happened here, but 12 and 13 releases across 2 months. And OpenFaaS Cloud is obviously actively developed.
CLI was getting a lot of interest from the community. It needed to be built from scratch, and every command that was added, it was useful to have a release and get it tested to get into the hands of users probably.
Cool. And this is supposed to be a histogram, which looks like it's rather broken. So hopefully we can see that on the deep dive dashboard. So the last thing I want to show off in the overview one is we can have the ability to break down by looking at the type of code that was added. No surprise that Go is pretty prominent across these repositories.
Mm. There'll be
We've got
Go, there'll be Bash, there's YAML, there'll be a lot of Markdown. You see, that's almost like the second biggest. And there's a bit of JavaScript and HTML in there as well.
no extensions.
Mm.
Not sure what.
Parsing error.
Yep, we got shell scripts, we've got YAML. In fact, if we just zoom in to this bottom, oh, there's a lot going on here. Okay. PEMs, Rs, stats, lock file. Okay. We got a fair amount of stuff going on here. This is just breaking it down by repository because all of the repos are primarily Go. I don't think we're going to get anything particularly useful from this, so we'll skip over. But the last bit on the overview, I like to call this the...
I've got to just interrupt. Someone on OpenFaaS Slack has said spikes in October. Was it Hacktoberfest?
Ah.
Yes, it would have been because we participated quite actively in that.
Yeah.
And those would be merged ones, right? Because the spam ones wouldn't have made it into the Git history.
Yes, I only analyzed the master branch.
Yeah, not the GitHub API, which is better. As I remember, I was asking you earlier because I was wondering if you're like, well, now that you're live on a webinar, give me admin access to your GitHub organization so we can import the data. Fortunately, you would Git cloning, which I think is a nicer way of doing it.
Yeah, it works well, I think. And you can do it for any public repository. One of the other use cases I've been trying to use Git series for is making decisions on when to adopt which service mesh should you use. Well, you can import all of them and see which ones are more vibrant, has the most contributors, and is actively or has a stable release cadence. Those are the things that we probably don't spend enough time investigating when we adopt something. Yeah. So this last bit is the how to get help. So are there any esoteric programming languages used across any of the OpenFaaS repos?
I guess the only thing that comes to mind is probably like that R file, which is one of the samples from the community.
And for some weird reason, I don't see R. Let's try. Do we have Python?
It's on your graph.
It was, yeah. I'm not sure why it's not showing up on my lovely table here. Do you know what names are going to show up on the Python?
There's potential examples for that. I mean, handler py.
Sorry, contributor. Who would write the Python on the OpenFaaS projects?
Me, probably.
You?
Lucas.
Yeah. No, it looks like it's 126 commits of Python files you have on your
But remember that author email is incorrect. We need to look at the author name. There'll be some from Ivana probably and Martin.
You are correct. Yeah, it's a bit better actually. So yeah, you're still the top 3. I love your different names across these.
The Alex one is surprising. I'm not sure what that one was. That might have been at the beginning when I didn't know how to Git properly. And there's a little bit when I worked at VMware. If you look at .go, you should see some Alex Ellis brackets, OpenFaaS Limited.
Yep.
Some Alex Ellis. I'm surprised we've not got any Alex Ellis VMware, but maybe that's because
there was in Python.
They weren't in the top 5. Yeah.
And if we take a look at
what about MDs? I don't.
MD, yeah. Let's take a look at Markdown.
Let's look at our managing directors. Yeah, okay. So I was writing a lot of docs when I was at VMware. John's been active. Lucas is really active as well.
Cool. Yeah, so this is, I think this table is good, especially if you join an organization and they're analyzing their commits this way and you want to know who to go speak to get help with Python or Ruby or Rust. I think this is a nice way to do it. But we don't have a great spread of stuff here. Is that some C code?
But I do actually like that too. I like the approach of let's see who's been touching what files, and then we can tap them up for support or throw it over the wall to them.
You're going to love the deep dive dashboard then. There's a time series based code owners analysis as well. So what's written in C? I'm curious. There's a fair number of C commits here.
Probably vended C-Go code rather than anything that's actually used. We don't even build in C-Go, but I bet that there's some vendor stuff that's got cruft in it.
Okay, which repository?
It's
then?
also a sample project of a C function.
Ah, nice. We said FASD, right? Will we take a look at that first?
Oh yeah.
So this is our commit count. It's a relatively new project. I can't remember what we were trying to identify with this.
Okay. So
yeah, the releases. That's what we wanted to do because we had that high number of releases.
yeah, I just had a look on GitHub. I'm not really sure. It just looks like maybe that was the best way to share binaries for people at the time. Because working on a Mac, you don't get you couldn't build it on a Mac at the time or run the tests because it needed WeaveNet, which is Linux only. This is one of the weirdest projects in OpenFaaS because you can only work on it on Linux and it's only for Linux. You can't run it on a Mac and connect to a Docker instance. It's meant to be like self-contained, serverless. Drop it on a VM, stateless, doesn't scale beyond one node. You can do like a RAID style HA if you want. Close the box, never open it again type of thing.
Ah, okay. Well, based on that, I've just switched over to FASNetties, unless you want to pick something else just to kind of run through this dashboard.
Oh, sure. Go for it.
FASNetties then. So this is the commit graph again. Only this time we're breaking it down to look at the insertions and deletions. So we can see the blue lines are a lot of insertions. So this is obviously early days where we're writing lots and lots of code. There's obviously some sort of large change was made here. So the purple is our deletions. I generally
likely.
Well, I think that would show as an insertion because you wouldn't be modifying any code.
Deletion, didn't you say?
Yeah, but when the insertions and deletions are both tracking each other like this, it generally means files were modified. Because the way, obviously, if you think of a Git patch, there's insertions and a deletion.
Could it be the upstream vendor dependency was changed, but not the name didn't change? Don't know.
Yeah.
At some point, what you need is maybe to zoom in on that, see the raw data.
I think we have access to the commits further down, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
The other thing that stands out here is we have this two double peaks, one of a massive deletion followed by two sizable insertions. This was when March 2019, so just over a year ago. A lot of code deleted.
I think to make sense of this, we need to exclude on the regex anything with the word vendor in it. Otherwise, it's just it's not particularly representative.
All right. I'll tell you what, let's jump down to the directory breakdown. So first, we'll take a look at March 2018 and then March 2019, and we'll see what we can see was modified. So we'll come back to the things we're skipping, but if we take a look, the directories here. So March 2018 was indeed a massive, not massive, but sizable vendor change. So the JSON iterator seems to have been brought in, and yeah, a few others. And
got some stuff in the Helm chart as well. Again, vendor. We probably need to have a look at excluding that if it's a prefix of vendor, and just have another look. So there should be some interesting information in here, but it's a bit wood for the trees.
All right. So what do we not want to see? Filter, FN, R, and you know what? I'm not that familiar with the regex syntax, but we're going to try and work this out.
You could do a contains because we don't have any files that say vendor at the end. I know vendor's always at the beginning. But...
Right, so I think if we do this, we want to filter on not vendor. I got very lucky that worked.
Well, let's look at the graph first.
Yeah, so all the vendor changes are
You
gone.
did get lucky there. So I'm seeing the YAML folder peaking. Again, that is something that we generate from the chart now. We used to maintain it separately. It's now generated from the chart. Lucas made a change there. It's really useful because we used to maintain both. Now we have the chart's a source of truth. That spits out YAML for x86, for ARM64.
Okay. And yeah, you can see the chart as well popping in here. We got documentation. Good. And of course, it's a Go project. I see something I see all the time with Go projects is all the code lives in the root directory for so long, and then they start to migrate and move it into subdirectories and packages and stuff like that. And OpenFaaS seems, or FaaSneties, seems to kind of follow that same pattern.
Yeah, because we merged in another controller called the operator that worked on CRDs into this code base right at the end, probably that last peak or the one before it, and then added more folders. So more code, more folders, potentially why there's a dip. This server folder coming in. No package server, maybe. The .github directory is changing a little bit, keeping our templates up to date for issues and PRs. Yeah, we've got the connector came in. And so what we started to do is use the FaaSneties repo for the charts for other things that we wanted. So they weren't all in separate repos, all in one. So we've got the NAS connector, we've vectored that, the MQTT connector that's got its chart in there, cron connector.
Yeah, you can see all that kind of popping up end-to-end tests, and then all the package directories they serve.
Yeah,
kind of broken stuff down. Nice. Okay,
let's jump. It's new. That looks interesting as well. Underneath.
Yeah, so this tracks new files added to the repository and looks at their extension. So that's a really good way of seeing migrations from JavaScript to TypeScript or from CSS to Sass. But I don't think we're going to see anything prominent across these repositories. Again, just with it being primarily Go.
No, and as I say, if we drop the vendor cache out of some of the repos, you just see a massive drop.
Let's jump back up here. So yeah, that's our commit one. So something else we tried to do with Git series is try to make it easy for newcomers to see what the commit patterns are within a repository by analyzing the size of those commits. So what we have here is the 90th quantile, the 50th quantile, and the first quantile. So it's very rare that you'd see a commit larger than this or smaller than this. So let's just ignore the one because it's not very interesting.
This is also not normalized, is it? This is including vendor.
Yeah, because this happens on at the commit level, we don't actually understand the contents of the commit when we build these queries. So, yeah, so I guess that's not going to be as, maybe the numbers aren't as great because of those vendor changes. But we can see roughly the 50th quantile is you modify 2 files and add 11 lines of code. Anywhere from there up to 155 lines of code across 12 files. So I think what you're seeing here is small typo fixes up to vendor changes. So quite a broad spectrum of what normal would be there, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. What else do we have this?
We're sort of running out of time now. I wondered what your other 2 graphs look like.
Yes.
At some point, you might want to think about like a word map based upon the commit message. If you sort of broke it down, I don't know if you could do that in Influx, or maybe do it separately. Get like how many times have you been using the word add, update, bug, and that sort of thing. That would be interesting.
Yeah, there are definitely things we can do that. We can't do the word map or the tokenization on Influx, but I could do that as a preprocessor and store those aggregates.
Like we were looking at earlier, I mean, you won't necessarily be able to put it in as an array, but it could be another table that you put in that's sort of a bit more denormalized, doesn't necessarily correlate back.
Yeah. Well, you actually have the ability on this table to filter by commits. For Kubernetes, these are the commits that mention Kubernetes as a raw string. The other things we have here before we move on are just the ability to break down by directory, which is more of a backup plan. If you had conventional or semantic commits, there's also the ability to break it down by whether it's a feature, a bug fix, etc., which is what this graph shows. So the commits aren't in that format, so we can't get too much. All right, let's jump through the last two, and then we can let you get back about your data.
You could actually find what was a bug fix by looking for the word closes. We normally use that keyword.
That's a good point. Yeah, we could do that. So this is the year-on-year analysis. So for this to work, I need to do 2019 01 01 and 2020 01. And we can see this. These are the commit counts across year after year by month. As I said, this dashboard not that interesting yet. The author breakdown is slightly more interesting. So we can see
3 different Alex's versions of me in there somehow.
Yeah. So your biggest commit year was 2017. This purple line here, at least towards the end, was really, really strong. Middle of the year, you got 2019 was a really strong year, with the end of 2019 being a bit calmer.
The other thing is we've got another organization that has commits in it as well that isn't represented here. OpenFaaS Incubator. I see Lucas has got quite a few commits in there. I would expect to see that too.
Yeah, his 2020 year started off really strong. I'm sure he's probably got a strong finish on 2019 somewhere. If we could maybe zoom in and find it. But I'm cautious of time. So, and these work on a semantic commits. I could modify these to work on a directory for projects that don't have semantic commits. But let's move on to the wall of shame. Now this one is a little bit memory and CPU intensive, so I'm going to try and run it across everything. And if it takes too long, we'll drop it down to maybe 2 years. You can see that timer is going up. So this first does a leaderboard for the most commits within a given window. So the most commits in any given month, and no surprise, you're top in the charts. And so your month with the most commits ever was October 2017 with 182 commits. Yeah, 2017 was obviously a really busy year for you working on this. It looks like you joined VMware in 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go again. Maybe I did ask too much of this machine.
You've got a 19 and then 18 and a 19 somehow mixed up there.
Where, sorry?
Ordering doesn't look right.
So this is ordered by number of commits and then the month in which those commits occurred. So.
Okay.
Now down here, what we have are not so great for open source, but for private repositories, quite useful. It will show you, if you join this organization, how many days will you commit code to master, so measurable code, on a monthly basis. For open source projects, even analyzing InfluxDB itself, these numbers are extremely skewed. So yeah, not that useful for open source, but you can see that, in fact, let's just sort by date. So early on, and then, yeah, so the peak number of commits per day was around 2018. And I guess these numbers are dropping because of, COVID maybe gone over the last few months. I don't know. Have you noticed a drop in contributions over the last?
Yeah, there's not a lot of people that contribute in on a regular basis. There's a few sort of sporadic, or they're taking a bit longer. We've also got the Ellis project, Ketchup and Arcade, where some people are making commits there instead. And as I said, there's another org called OpenFaaS Incubator, and some commits end up going there instead of into OpenFaaS.
Ah, okay, cool.
But yeah, COVID isn't great for sponsorship or consulting work or GitHub commits. It's all for your health, for that matter.
And we'll finish up with the last graph, which again for open source is really doesn't provide a lot of value, but for private organizations, being able to understand and classify what a week of work looks like, and then how long someone has been without time off. So currently the query will look for more than 4 days of commits in any given 7-day period, and that counts as a working week. And it would seem, based on the numbers we've seen above in the leaderboard, that towards the end of 2017, you worked on this 18 weeks straight. A lot of commits. The end of 2019, you went for 12 weeks with committing something every day. Now, of course, you're merging a lot of these branches, and this does work on. Maybe this is author name. I'm not sure. It would actually, yeah, it looks like it is. So, was there anything large that happened at the end of 2019 that you were just putting in a lot of work there?
Yeah, I think so. I think towards the end of 2019, I was basically independent then and trying to hold up, going from a team of 4 full-time people to me. I was trying to sort of take the load on, I think. So if you look at my GitHub bathroom tiles, you'll see a similar effect. And I think this year there's some days, because I've done more client work now, you'll see some gaps in the tiles. If you look at the year before, you probably see that it's quite dense. See from about February, we start to see some gaps, but I think basically 2019, if you can click on it, I don't know, I think it will update. Let's see if it does or not.
What will update, sorry?
2019. Does it update your bathroom?
No, I don't think so.
Yes, it does. You can see basically, other than a little bit of time in March, pretty much working solid every day on open source. So 2020, a bit more client work. I was explaining this in a Twitter thread. So I saw one of these guys has got himself up to 10 grand a month in sponsorships, which I think is a bit of a luxury, really. I mean, if you can get to that point, it's similar to a low-paid job in IT, like an intern or junior salary in dollars. But certainly enough to kind of keep things afloat and concentrate on the project. For me, you can see those gaps in having to sort of do consulting work to pay the bills, and I'm developing a business there because, in the long run, without sufficient contributors, without full-time staff, it's very difficult to keep open source project going. I mean, if you don't have a job, you don't have anybody paying you to do that. It's the option. There aren't many options for you. Really, it's just how much can you afford to give.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was really interesting from my point of view. I hope the stats kind of give you a little bit of insight into your own project that maybe you didn't have before. And it was really good of you to join me today. So thank you, Alex.
Yeah, I've sent a few screenshots out. You have to take a look. Some of the more interesting graphs. Looking forward to see how this project develops. And actually, I wonder if at some point you might sort of host the data that you've ingested somewhere in a read-only mode, so you can have a look at it, or maybe do an export. Maybe you could write an OpenFaaS function to export something from the Prometheus data and draw a nice graph. Who knows?
Yeah, our kind of cloud team are working on public buckets that people can consume and build their own dashboards on data. And we're actually working on the ability to embed those graphs and cells into other websites and projects as well. So, I mean, hopefully over time, as the project kind of evolves, we can get more of that data available to people to play with without doing the hard bit of importing it, of course.
I guess finally, the question I'd have for you is it practical that somebody could go to the repo that you have here and get to what we saw today, or is there things they need to know? I noticed there wasn't a README file, for instance. So what, are you planning to add one?
Yeah, of course. So the README, as this was conference-driven development, and I just had to make it work so I could record my talk. There's a lot of things that are missing. There's no tests, which I'd love to add to the project. There was no documentation. But in order to get to where in order to have the graphs that I showed today, all you need to do is run git series analysis, run the Telegraph config, and everything works. Apply that packager.yaml. But it takes like 5 minutes to get up and running.
Well, if you've got instructions for that, do publish them. I'll retweet it if anyone's listening or watching this later on and wants to try it with their project. I'm sure there's loads of people that would love to sort of dig through their repos. Yeah,
well, I promise to you and anyone watching that I will have a README added to the project today.
Today?
I will do it today.
Very cool.
For sure.
Excellent. All right.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me again, Alex.